Have you ever stood in the quiet of your own home, listening not to noise but to absence? Not to rebellion, but to a silence that echoes with indifference? What if I told you that what you perceive as defiance in your child may be a mirror, polished by your own unconscious? And worse, what if the distance you feel was not created by them, but inherited from a place inside you that you never dared to explore? There is something ancient unfolding here, not a parenting tactic, not a modern psychology tip, but a confrontation between the mask you wear and the truth you've buried. And that confrontation begins now. Respect is not a command. It cannot be demanded, bribed, or shouted into existence. It is not earned in the ways the world has taught you. It is remembered in the soul, like a forgotten language, etched in symbols you've stopped recognizing. Presence, integrity, initiation. Your children are not just disobedient, they are messengers, archetypes rising from your own shadow. And until you stop punishing the symptom and start decoding the symbol, you will lose more than their respect. You will lose yourself in the process. Let us abandon the lie that age alone grants authority. In the unconscious realm, there is no elderhood without initiation, no reverence without reckoning. If your child looks at you with contempt, ask not, "What is wrong with them?" but, "Where have I failed to become worthy?" That question burns, it humbles, but it also opens a portal. Because beneath every fractured bond is an opportunity to reconstruct not just the relationship, but the self that was never fully built to begin with. The child who defies you is not simply rebelling. They are reacting to an energy you no longer control. Something in you, passive, wounded, fragmented, is echoing louder than your words, and they can hear it. They don't want a perfect parent. They want a whole human. And wholeness begins where illusions die. But this process will cost you. It will strip you of every excuse. It will dismantle every identity you've clung to. That is the price of transformation. And yet, what could be more valuable than becoming the kind of soul your child cannot help but respect? There are 8 paths through this inner terrain, but none of them are shortcuts. Each one demands courage, confrontation, and the willingness to descend into the underworld of your own psyche. This is not about fixing them. It is about remembering you. And as we journey through these 8 revelations, remember this: the child's gaze is not your enemy. It is the threshold. And what you do next will determine whether you cross it or vanish behind it forever. You thought respect was lost in a moment, perhaps in the day your child slammed the door, or when they rolled their eyes and walked away without listening. But respect does not vanish. It decays. It rots slowly beneath the surface, in years of gestures missed, words unsaid, presences ausentes. And before the decay there was distance, and before the distance there was something even more subtle, a fracture. Not in them, in you. A fracture so small it felt harmless, like a hairline, crack on an old mirror. But over time it splinters, and every time you looked at them, you were only seeing the reflection of your own unattended wounds staring back. We are trained to speak of parenting in terms of roles: the provider, the nurturer, the guide. But these are masks, polished and rehearsed, often worn so long we forget the skin beneath. And children, they do not respond to masks. They feel essence. They hear the tone beneath the words, the contradiction between action and energy. They know when you say "I love you" but recoil emotionally. They sense when you give advice but never followed your own. They see your pain before you admit it, and when they stop respecting you, it's often because they no longer believe in the character you're playing. Not because they're cruel, but because you've become unrecognizable to the soul they once trusted. You may think you are guiding them, teaching them, protecting them, but what if they are the ones doing that for you? What if their rebellion is not destruction, but initiation? What if every time they push you away, they are unconsciously forcing you to confront the parts of yourself you've buried for decades? The unloved child within, the abandoned dreams, the roles you accepted because society expected, not because your soul agreed. Your child, whether they're 10 or 30, is not just a person. They are a symbol, a doorway, an oracle disguised in rebellion, and their resistance is a call not to correct them, but to awaken you. The tragedy is not that they don't respect you. The tragedy is that, somewhere along the way, you stopped respecting yourself. You stopped listening to your inner voice, trading instinct for instruction manuals. You began parenting from fear, of failure, of judgment, of becoming like your own parents. You began using control where presence was needed, rewards where ritual was missing. You taught discipline, but forgot initiation, and so they drifted. Not because they hate you, but because they cannot feel you. And if they cannot feel you, how can they follow you? It's a myth that children want authority. They want meaning. They want a presence that is anchored, not performative. That is why the words fall flat. That is why the punishments backfire. They don't want rules, they want realness. They want to be seen, not managed. And they want to see you, not the version you curated to survive adulthood, but returning to that version of yourself is not easy, because the one who knew how to love deeply, feel freely, listen fully, was exiled long ago. Banished beneath duties, betrayals, and disappointments, reclaiming their respect is not a mission of power. It's an act of remembrance. But how do you remember who you were before the world told you who to be? Do you feel the tightening in your chest right now? That isn't guilt. It's recognition. Something deep within you remembers what it felt like to be respected, not for what you said or did, but simply because you were. And something in you grieves that loss, but grief is the beginning of alchemy. The sorrow you feel is not weakness. It is the soul preparing to return. And to your child, that return will be louder than any lecture. They won't say it, but they'll feel it. A shift, a crack in the mask, a softness in the presence. And in time, maybe they will come closer, not because you forced them, but because they recognized in you something sacred, a parent who finally became real. You were never taught how to be whole. You were taught how to be useful, how to be strong when you were breaking, how to smile when your voice was shaking, and perhaps how to silence your own needs in the name of responsibility. You carried those lessons into adulthood like sacred commandments, hoping they would build a life worth living. But they didn't. They built walls. And inside those walls you raised a child, one who could not feel the warmth of your heart through the fortress you built around it. You loved them fiercely, no one doubts that. But you loved them through armor. And armor doesn't hug, it doesn't hear, it doesn't hold, it protects, yes. But sometimes what it protects us from is the very connection we crave. There is something cruel about the way children mirror us. They don't repeat our words, they expose our contradictions. They don't remember what we say, they absorb who we are. And this is why their disrespect wounds so deeply. Because it's not just rejection, it's revelation. A sudden, sharp unveiling of our unfinished selves. And when they speak with defiance, when they turn cold or cruel or indifferent, it's as if they are speaking the words we once wanted to say to our own parents, but never could. The past echoes. Generations of silence collapse into a single moment at the dinner table. And suddenly, it's not your child talking back. It's the voice of your younger self, still waiting to be heard. Do you see it now? This is not just about them, it never was. This is about legacy, about the emotional DNA we pass on, not through blood, but through behavior, through the wounds we never tended, the stories we never questioned, the roles we accepted without protest. Every sigh, every avoidance, every moment you chose control instead of vulnerability was a seed. And now, those seeds have grown. And you're looking at them while in your child, in their distance, in their rage, in their silence. You are not just confronting them. You are confronting the echoes of everything unspoken in your own soul. But here's the truth no one tells you. You can stop the echo. You can disrupt the cycle, not by changing them, but by going inward, by tracing the disrespect not as an insult, but as a signal, a call to descend. Because beneath the disrespect lies something more primal, pain. And pain is honest. Pain doesn't perform, it points, it reveals. And if you can sit with that pain, hold it without fleeing or fixing, you will find something extraordinary beneath it, a key. a key to the room you've kept locked for decades, the room where your own forgotten self still waits, quietly, to be remembered. And when you enter that room, untrembling, unprepared, undone, you will not find shame. You will find origin, the first moment you felt unseen, the first time you swallowed your truth to keep the peace, the first betrayal you endured in silence. And when you see those moments clearly, you will also see how they shaped your parenting. Not because you failed, but because you never knew another way. And in that clarity you will be offered a choice: continue the inheritance of unconscious pain, or begin the sacred rebellion of becoming whole. Not perfect, not powerful, just whole. But beware, this kind of healing is quiet. It doesn't come with applause. It will not earn you immediate affection. In fact, your child may resist even more at first, because they will sense the shift, and they may not trust it. They've built their defenses too. They've grown up learning which parts of you were safe and which were dangerous. Now, as you become someone new, they must unlearn what they once believed. And that takes time, it takes presence, it takes humility, but above all, it takes consistency, not in behavior, but in being real, being there, being enough. They may still speak with anger, they may still test you, not because they hate you, but because they are watching to see if your return is real. They are not testing your authority, they are testing your soul. And when you remain present, not reactive, not righteous, but rooted, they will begin to notice. The tension will soften, the hostility will turn to confusion. And from that confusion, a fragile curiosity may bloom. One that asks silently, "Can I trust this new you?" And if you answer not with words, but with unwavering presence, that question might one day be replaced with reverence, not the kind born of fear, but the kind born of truth. There comes a moment when pretending becomes heavier than breaking, a moment when the silence between you and your child becomes so loud it presses against your ribs like a scream you cannot locate. You wake up tired, not from lack of sleep, but from the weight of misalignment. The rituals feel empty, the advice sounds hollow in your mouth, and no matter how much you try to reconnect, something remains blocked. That something is not them, it's the false self you've been wearing for so long that you began to confuse it with your truth. And when that false self begins to crack, you will feel lost, vulnerable, exposed. But beneath that rupture lies the most sacred opportunity of all, to be seen not as the parent you aspired to be, but as the human you truly are. Children do not need heroes, they need witnesses. Witnesses to their pain, yes, but more urgently to yours, because when they see you admit your fear, your regret, your uncertainty, they finally receive permission to do the same. And in a world that punishes vulnerability with mockery, that permission is revolutionary. But you cannot offer it if you still cling to the myth of the infallible parent. You cannot teach them how to respect you if you still fear what you'll see when you look in the mirror. The paradox is cruel. Only when you surrender your need for control does true authority begin to emerge, not the authority of dominance, but of depth. There is a quiet power in saying, "I don't know." There is grace in admitting, "I failed you there." These confessions are not weaknesses. They are sacred rites of passage. They say to your child, "I trust you enough to be real with you." And in turn, they begin to trust your presence, not your rules, not your corrections. You, the you who bleeds, the you who reflects, the you who is still evolving. This kind of parenting requires a death, the death of the image of who you were supposed to be, of what a good parent looks like. It is a funeral of fantasy, but in that funeral, something ancient is reborn, the capacity to love without conditions, to lead without masks, to relate without fear. Do you remember what it felt like to be truly seen as a child? Not praised, not managed, not instructed, seen. If you don't, that's part of the pain, that's part of what you've been trying to provide, without ever having received. And it's no wonder the effort exhausts you. You are trying to build a bridge from memory fragments, from blueprints that were never drawn for you. But here's the secret: even broken people can build temples, even wounded hands can carry grace. You are not too late. The damage is not irreversible. The story is not finished unless you stop writing. And maybe that's the most powerful truth of all, that every day, in every gesture, you are editing the inheritance your child will carry into the world. And yes, there will be days when your effort feels invisible, when your presence is met with coldness, when your attempt to speak is drowned in silence. Do not take it personally. Your child is not rejecting your love. They are testing its resilience. They want to know if it will still be there after the storm, if it can survive their doubt. Because respect is not built in conversation. It is sculpted in the aftermath, in what you do after the door slams, in how you look at them after the tears fall, in the stillness after the argument, when the air is thick and hearts are fragile. That's where the repair begins, not with words, but with presence. This kind of presence cannot be faked. It cannot be rushed. It is not performative. It comes from somewhere deeper, from the part of you that remembers your own longing to be accepted without condition, from the depth that only pain can carve. And when your child sees that, even if they cannot name it, they feel it, like an ancient memory being awakened, like something they didn't know they were waiting for. And that feeling, that recognition, is the beginning of respect. Not the shallow kind built on obedience, but the profound soul-rooted respect that arises only when two beings finally meet, not in power, but in truth. There will come a night when you stand in the doorway of your child's room and they won't look up. Not because they hate you, but because something inside them isn't sure if you've really returned. And you'll feel it, that sting, that ache of invisibility. But stay, do not flee into silence or anger. Stay not to be seen, but to see. Not to fix, but to feel. Because love, at this depth, is not loud. It is not transactional. It is presence that persists through rejection. It is the soul's ability to remain open even while bleeding. And if you can hold that space, long enough, honest enough, something begins to shift. Not always in them, but always in you. You begin to realize that respect is not something your child gives you. It's something they remember in your presence. It emerges not from discipline, but from dignity, from the dignity of your inner work, from the way you stopped reacting and started reflecting, from how you began to speak with less certainty but more truth. They respect not what you demand, but what you embody. And embodiment takes time. It is forged in the invisible, in the way you look at them when they don't perform, in the tone of your voice when they disappoint you, in whether or not your love disappears when things get hard. That's where the true wound lives, in the places where love was once withdrawn. That is what your child fears the most, that you too will vanish when they stop pleasing you. And so they test you, over and over, until your love becomes undeniable, until it no longer flinches in the face of their fire, until it becomes a ground. And when it does, something miraculous happens, not quickly, not dramatically, but subtly, like light finding its way through the cracks of a long-abandoned chapel. They start to return, first in glances, then in gestures, then, maybe, say in words, and those words won't sound like apologies. They will sound like invitations. Can I come close again? Not spoken, but felt. And you will know this is how the healing begins. But even then, even as respect slowly rises, it will be fragile. Do not expect it to look the way it once did. The old version, the one built on roles and fear, has died. This new respect is different. It is built on mutual recognition. It grows in the soil of shared humanity. It does not require perfection. It asks only for truth. It is not hierarchical. It is circular. And in this circle, you are no longer just the parent. You are the example, not of control, but of courage, of someone who descended into the depths and came back with something real, something your child can now follow, not because they have to, but because they want to. And perhaps the greatest paradox of all is this: your child's disrespect was never a failure. It was a signal, a sacred disruption, a calling home. Their rebellion was never against you. It was against the falsity you inherited and unknowingly passed on. And their defiance cracked the illusion. They shattered the mask. And in doing so, they gave you the greatest gift of all, a chance to become what you were always meant to be. Not a parent in control, but a soul in communion, a mirror not of rules but of presence, not of authority, but of authenticity. So now, here you stand, changed, not perfectly, not completely, but deeply. And perhaps for the first time in years, you no longer need your child to respect you in order to feel worthy, because something inside you has shifted. You've gone to the underworld of your psyche and retrieved the part of you that had been exiled. You've mourned your own childhood in the silence of the night. You've sat with your shame without needing to be forgiven. You've listened without defense. And you've spoken without the need to be right. And all of that is sacred, whether or not they see it yet. And maybe one day, when they are older, when they too are holding the weight of another life in their hands, they'll remember, not the rules, not the lectures, but the way you stayed, the way you changed, the way you finally saw them as in yourself. And in that memory, something ancient will stir, a cycle will close, a new one will begin. And the story, your story, will be carried forward not as a wound, but as a blessing. There is a silence that comes after the storm, not of absence, but of presence rediscovered, a stillness where everything finally breathes. You sit in that silence now, not because the questions have been answered, but because something has shifted in the way they echo. What once felt like failure now feels like a calling. What once felt like distance now reveals depth. And what once was labeled disrespect now appears as a mirror, perhaps broken, but still sacred. This is the space in which real change begins, not with grand declarations, but with a single breath that dares to be honest. The soul does not move in straight lines. It spirals. It returns to old wounds, not to reopen them, but to reclaim them. And perhaps as you reflect on all that has been said, you begin to sense that this journey was never about your child alone. It was about the labyrinth within you, the chambers you had sealed, the voices you had silenced, the truths you had feared to face. Your child was not your adversary. They were the guide disguised as resistance, the symbol that cracked open the armor you thought would protect you, but which only kept you from your own becoming. Now, something is different, not louder, not clearer, but more alive. You don't need to name it. You don't need to explain it. You only need to stay with it. Let it move through you like a forgotten song returning to your memory. You've touched something real, not out there, but in here. The gravity beneath the roles, the fire beneath the fatigue, the longing beneath the discipline. That is where respect is born. In the soft place where truth and love meet without armor. In the eyes that finally see the other not as an object to be managed, but as a soul to be met. You are not the same, and you shouldn't be. Because in this sacred unraveling, you found something you didn't know you had lost. The ability to be with yourself, fully, courageously, imperfectly. And that, more than any rule or technique, is what your child needed. Not a perfect parent, a present one. Not someone who always knew the answers, but someone brave enough to ask the real questions. And now those questions live in you not as burden, but as bridges between past and future, between shadow and light, between you and the one you love. So ask yourself quietly, what if the return of respect begins not with them kneeling, but with you rising? Rising without disguise, without defense, just rising from the place where you fell, carrying only what is real. What if all of this, the silence, the rupture, the pain, was not the end of something, but the ceremony before your rebirth? What if the soul of your child has been waiting all along for you to return not as the person you were, but as the being you were meant to become? This is not a conclusion. This is a threshold, and before you leave, take with you this. When a child no longer sees a parent, it is because the parent no longer sees themselves. But when the self is remembered, the bond is reborn. And love, once lost in the fog of forgetting, finds its way home again. If this journey touched something in you, a memory, a wound, a truth you hadn't dared name, then you are no longer alone. You are part of something deeper, a movement toward wholeness, toward consciousness, toward the sacred restoration of what was once broken. So let this not be the end, but the beginning of your next descent and your next rising. And if this voice, this vision, this language of soul spoke to yours, then remain with us. Join the path, like, comment, and share this video, not because we asked, but because you feel compelled to carry this message forward. And subscribe to Archimind, because this is not just a channel, it's a mirror, a fire, a return. And somewhere, perhaps just out of view, the child who once stopped listening may already be turning back.